Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. It was a phrase, sanitary dictatorship. This was coined by Bishop Athanasius Schneider some months ago to refer to the reaction to COVID-19 from politicians and public health experts. It seemed perhaps at the time to be hyperbole, but it is definitely not hyperbole now. We are told, originally we were told that we needed to flatten the curve. The curve has been well and truly flattened, but nonetheless, apparently lockdowns are going to continue or going to be intensified until when? Until there's a vaccine? And will everyone be forced to take a vaccine? Well, I suppose we'll have to wait and see, but I wanted to read from an essay published today by William M. Briggs. Coronavirus update, the suppression of hydroxychloroquine and other conspiracies. Yes, conspiracies. Anything that the elite disagrees with is misinformation and or a conspiracy theory. Of course, conspiracies are real. And as I never tire of pointing out, in 2002 and 2003, the government of the United States, the government of Britain, and other countries entered into a conspiracy to incite invasion of Iraq based on a falsehood that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Oh, also that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. Well, Iraq was invaded and conquered, and then resistance began, and it was a very ugly spectacle, which led to a waste of, trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives. And who was prosecuted for this conspiracy? Who was punished for this conspiracy? No one. No one at all. Briggs writes, the first section of this are fun conspiracies to highlight the political crisis. The second section are the numbers showing the medical crisis is over. The third section discusses the future of the asinine political crisis. Shh, don't tell anybody. It's Conspiracy Theory Week. Recall when reading that scientists tell us not all theories are false. There's a tweet here from Simon Dolan, which says, have had literally dozens of direct messages from doctors and nurses in the NHS, who all say the same thing. Barely any COVID cases for the whole period, sat around doing nothing, and threatened with losing job if they say anything. Not one has ever messaged me to contradict the above. My contacts haven't been idle, but then they are always busy. Nevertheless, we've all seen videos galore of twerking nurses and doctors frolicking in empty wards. Perhaps lulls between surges and blowing off steam. Then, now, likely this fellow's observation is true. How about the one where they will force vaccines on us? They'd never do that, would they? Force you to be safe? And story from Yahoo News, coronavirus restrictions will remain if large numbers refuse vaccine, warns UK task force. Coronavirus restrictions will remain in place if large numbers of people refuse to take a COVID-19 vaccine. There are fears that millions of Britons may opt out, with many swayed by debunked anti-vax claims spread online. A number of scientific studies have debunked previous claims by anti-vaxxers, including the false claim that the MMR jab can cause autism. But two recent surveys show a large proportion of Britons are either against a coronavirus vaccine or unsure about taking one. On Monday, the government announced that it had signed deals with pharmaceutical companies to secure 90 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines. I don't know how this exactly is possible. Have these vaccines been tested? Have they been demonstrated to be efficacious? Have they been demonstrated not to be dangerous? Briggs comments, whether or not MMR can cause autism, which I think it does not, this is irrelevant to whether a corona doom vaccine will be safe. There has never been a common cold vaccine in humans, especially of the type being touted, and we all know how cocky and overcertain scientists are. Besides, why a vaccine? It isn't necessary to control the pandemic. This pandemic, like all pandemics, is going away. Why insist on a vaccine for this one and no others? It appears the propaganda line is that herd immunity is impossible, which is itself impossible. What's really in this vaccine that might soon become a must-have to buy, sell, or travel? Makers of vaccines don't have to worry. They've been indemnified. If something goes wrong, nobody can sue. Bubble indemnity. Big tech, big pharma firms will not be held accountable for side effects of COVID vaccine. A senior executive for pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca has confirmed that his company cannot face legal action for any potential side effects caused by its COVID vaccine. Those affected will have no legal recourse. AstraZeneca is one of 25 pharmaceutical companies already testing their COVID vaccines on humans in preparation for injecting hundreds of millions of people. These are flush times for Britain's largest pharmaceutical company, worth something in the order of £70 million. They have just reported bumper profits of $12.6 billion in the last 6 months alone. Must be nice to be a pharmaceutical, and this really inspires confidence, don't you think? That no, indemnified, no legal recourse. Do they really think that people are going to be rushing out to take this vaccine when it's already been determined that if it is indeed unsafe or even deadly, that there's nothing that anyone can do about it? Just as this typical expected pandemic is on its way out, we find those in charge of us demanding ever greater restrictions. Why? Tyrant Matt Soy for Me Hancock has banned tea parties in England. You're not allowed to go to somebody else's home. Tyrant Anthony Never Shake Hands Again Frauducci now says people must wear goggles. And his sycophants and the power-hungry rush to embrace the suggestion. Nancy Pelosi now requires masks on the wallet grabbers on the House floor. Perhaps this headline is a clue. Rich get richer. Amazon sales jumped 40%, Facebook profit increased by 98%, and Apple posted more than an $11 billion profit in the last quarter. Of that, plus the myriad headlines speaking of the enormous number of small business closures. What accounts for this level of bloody-minded idiocy in our leaders? Playing dress-up in the streets, they promise will keep us safe. Threatening lockdowns unless citizens line up for their shots is extortion. They have no qualms about saying it either. It's hard not to consider the wilder theories about what this rush-to-vaccines vaccines will do to people. They are all surely not true theories, but they will be believed, and not irrationally, given the behavior of our leaders. Recall how for years propagandists and governments assured us that Russia stole the election for Trump. Remember that Trump was impeached? Both organs of control, propagandists and government, took foreign involvement seriously. They said they believed, or did they lie? No? Then how about this? And it's a reference to a story from the New York Times, which I talked about last week. This New York Times article by Paul Moser is a smoking gun on the genesis of the coronavirus lockdowns. According to the article, the Chinese Communist Party launched a massive social media campaign in Italy to advertise its coronavirus lockdown measures in early March. Then comes the most bizarre conspiracy, the forbidding of any positive news on hydroxychloroquine. Even Fauci forgot his earlier peer-reviewed praise of the drug before now poo-pooing it. It started, did we already forget, by a mysterious article put into Lancet, the British medical politics magazine. The peer-reviewed article showed HCQ didn't work. It was a fraud with faked data and written by a sex worker, among others. Spurgs discovered the fraud, exposed it, and the journal was forced to retract the paper. Nobody has satisfactorily ever explained why it happened, though. Why go to so much trouble to fake a study on a drug long in use the world over? Who paid for the fake study? Why and how did the Lancet come to publish it? Who benefits from the attempts to ban this cheap, non-patented, potentially curative drug? Besides big pharma and government, that is. Don't keep reading until you have answered these questions. At this point, you have to remind yourself that history did not only happen in history. Startling events, schemes, conspiracies, cabals, frauds plots are not only things of the past. The events we've seen don't all need to be conspiracies, however. It's sufficient enough that the people lording it over us believe the same and therefore tend to act the same. How about that big press conference by a suite of doctors on the benefits and risks of HCQ, hours worth of material? Big tech, along with the usual propaganda outlets, began purging the press conference almost immediately after it happened. They didn't just purge the docs at this conference, but others who discussed HCQ positively. A similar thing happened earlier with 2 docs in California who presented accurate statistics on this and other pandemics. Statistics which suggested what readers here already know. Dr. Simone Gold tweeted, "Not only did we hold a press conference and showcase our knowledge and experience with COVID-19 and hydroxychloroquine, but we also presented significant evidence of its safety and efficacy. Social media companies censored and removed it all. Why?" And then Ohio decided to ban it before, well, I suppose unbanning it. Let's see. Here's a quote from Marcia Angel, former editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, author of The Truth About the Drug Companies. Quote, "Now primarily a marketing machine to sell drugs of dubious benefit, this industry uses its wealth and power to co-opt every institution that might stand in its way, including the U.S. Congress, the Food and Drug Administration, academic medical centers, and the medical profession itself," unquote. And it was banned in the Australian province of Victoria. HCQ is now, after years of safe use, a poison in England, but only from July 23rd to October 22nd, 2020, after which it will be okay again. Oddly specific. No. Then some guy named Harvey Risch, a well-known doctor and epidemiologist, slipped one past the goalie and was able to get an article in Newsweek, of all places. "The key to defeating COVID-19 already exists. We need to start using it." Quote, "I am usually accustomed to advocating for positions within the mainstream of medicine, so I've been flummoxed to find that in the midst of a crisis, I'm fighting for a treatment that the data fully support, but which, for reasons having nothing to do with a correct understanding of the science, have been pushed to the sidelines." It's a very long article for a news magazine filled with pointers to papers showing the efficacy and weaknesses of the drug. That it got into a Prague outlet is what is curious. Maybe the magazine's editor got shafted by a pharmaceutical once. Finally, the strange insistence on closing both bars and churches while allowing everything else. The godmother wouldn't allow chicken wings to be classed as foods in his efforts to keep New York bars closed. Supreme Cup John Roberts ruled churches are a no-no while casinos are just fine in the great state of Nevada. Perhaps the church's own limp-wristed response. Is it only coincidence that these are the places people gather to discuss how evil and feckless government is? And he provides a graph of COVID deaths, and we see, as we've seen for quite some time, a tremendous drop off. In the States, we still have mask madness with male and female Karens screeching at people for not wearing masks, for which there is no good medical reason for healthy people to wear. This is what the review of all mask studies found. Good luck convincing our dear leaders of that, though. In the States and England, that is. The Netherlands, we find calm. The land with no face masks, Holland's top scientists say there's no solid evidence coverings work and warn they could even damage the fight against COVID-19. Yes, Sweden too had no mask madness nor lockdowns and did fine. Sweden unveils promising COVID-19 data as new cases plunge. The US should have acted like 30 spread out Swedens. The CDC admits what we have been telling you since the beginning. I think you're correct about inflated COVID death statistics. CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield acknowledged Friday that the number of COVID-19 deaths could be inflated, where someone who had the virus actually died from something else but was recorded as a COVID death. How about that? How about that? Oh, did somebody say greater reimbursement? CDC Director acknowledges hospitals have a monetary incentive to overcount coronavirus deaths. Toby Young reports at Lockdown Skeptics that deaths are below the 5-year average for 6 weeks in a row. What was all that about a second wave of Boris? The ONS has published a chart showing, among other things, that the number of people dying from influenza and pneumonia has been below the 5-year average, the dotted lines, since mid-April. Could it be that deaths from respiratory failure that would normally be attributed to influenza and pneumonia are being falsely attributed to COVID-19? Dr. John Lee warned of that risk in his first article for The Spectator. It might appear far more of a killer than flu, simply because of the way that deaths are recorded. Toby Young is not very pleased with Boris Johnson's handling of COVID-19. And he wrote in the Telegraph, "I've lost count on the number of U-turns the government has done. First, we were told that masks were unnecessary. Now they're mandatory in indoor public spaces. Primary schools were supposed to reopen weeks before the summer holidays, then they weren't. You are absolutely positively allowed to go to Spain on your summer holidays. Oh no, wait a minute, you're not." It's hardly surprising that even members of the cabinet are being caught out by last-minute policy shifts. But in the last 48 hours, the government's handling of the ongoing crisis has reached a new pitch of incoherence. August 1st was supposed to be the day another raft of restrictions lifted, with bowling alleys, skating rinks, and casinos all allowed to reopen. Live sporting events were due to resume, and weddings of up to 30 people would be permitted. It was time to turbo boost the economy. But on Friday, Boris announced he was going to squeeze the brake pedal in response to a surge in infections across England, which meant none of these things would happen. Worse, a local lockdown was imposed in Greater Manchester, East Lancashire, and parts of West Yorkshire, thanks to a fresh outbreak in the northwest. So what's the message coming out of Downing Street? That the crisis is far from over and we need to be super vigilant if we're going to avoid a second wave? Apparently not, because the government has stuck to its plan to launch Rishi Sunak's Eat Out to Help Out scheme, with diners in over 72,000 cafes, pubs, and restaurants getting 50% off for the month of August. In addition, the shielding guidance, whereby the elderly and vulnerable were advised to take extra steps to protect themselves, was paused on Saturday. That's encouraging. Virus almost gone then? No. Less than 24 hours later, we learned that Boris is considering extending the shielding policy to everyone over 50. So the Prime Minister has simultaneously slammed on the brakes, executed a U-turn, and pressed the accelerator. No wonder the government appears to be drifting. Yes, this is quite devastating here. It seems the Prime Minister was too busy conjugating Greek and Latin verbs at Eton to pay any attention in maths. When I think of his handling of the coronavirus crisis, I picture a child behind the wheel of a racing car. He's overwhelmed by the data constantly popping up on his dashboard, has no idea what any of it means, so just randomly presses different levers and pedals, spins the wheel as fast as he can, and hopes for the best. Yeah, I don't know how Boris Johnson gets away with it. It just seems that there's just a complete collapse in confidence in government in Great Britain. That, oh, yes, Theresa May was a disaster, and she got the boot finally. And so Boris is a disaster. But, I mean, what are you going to do, right? Apparently, they are all disasters now. A very good read from Mike Hearn. It's from July 26th. It's called Pseudoepidemics, Why COVID-19 is Guaranteed to Never End. And this is indeed a frightening, perhaps even a terrifying thought, and it may well be true. He begins, the whooping cough ripped through the hospital like wildfire. It started with an internist and spread from there, with a severe cough quickly developing in other healthcare workers. Whilst not deadly for healthy adults, the disease can be fatal for the elderly, the frail, and very young children, so the health system moved quickly. There was no time to lose. Within weeks, over 1,000 staff were furloughed and quarantined. 142 people tested positive for the disease. Thousands of people were given antibiotics, and ICU beds were closed. It was a swift and effective response by highly trained public health professionals, armed with the best tools modern medicine could provide. Only one thing went wrong. None of it was real. Gina Colada's story in the New York Times about what happened in 2006 at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center makes for astonishing reading. I can't recount it better than she did. You should really just go and read it right now, but if you'd rather not, I'll quote some of the most important parts. Not a single case of whooping cough was confirmed with the definitive test growing the bacterium in the laboratory. Instead, it appears the healthcare workers probably were afflicted with ordinary respiratory diseases like the common cold. Specialists say the problem was that they placed too much faith in a quick and highly sensitive molecular test that led them astray. At Dartmouth, the decision was to use the test, a PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. Their sensitivity makes false positives likely, and when hundreds or thousands of people are tested, as occurred at Dartmouth, false positives can make it seem like there is an epidemic. There are no national data on pseudoepidemics caused by an over-reliance on such molecular tests, but Dr. Trish M. Pearl said that pseudoepidemics happen all the time. The Dartmouth case may have been the largest, but it was by no means an exception. There was a similar whooping cough scare at Children's Hospital in Boston last fall that involved 36 adults and 2 children. Definitive tests, though, did not find pertussis. Because we had cases we thought were pertussis and because we had vulnerable patients at the hospital, we lowered our threshold, she said. If we had stopped there, I think we all would have agreed that we had an outbreak of whooping cough and that we had controlled it. It's a problem. We know it's a problem, Dr. Pearl said. My guess is that what happened at Dartmouth is going to become more common. This is quite a long essay. I will skip to the conclusion. COVID at times have crushed my faith in government and academic health expertise, probably forever. So many problems have occurred, like modelers driving government policy despite being unable to actually program computers or predict epidemics. But one of the most depressing problems is the apparently universal assumption that false positives aren't important and lockdowns are free. Given current definitions, COVID-19 will never end. People will be dying of it forever, even if the virus disappears completely. Worse still, the system is locked in a series of feedback loops. If something causes test numbers to rise, then so will case numbers, which in turn will cause a further increase in testing, causing the rise to continue, triggering local lockdowns and pointless evidence-free rituals until people get depressed and stop trying to do things, causing numbers being tested to fall again. Health is run by people who suffer no consequences from policy overreactions. Lockdown-induced job losses won't affect them as they work for the government. A larger scale case of one rule for them and another for us can't be imagined. It's thus no surprise when we read things like Public Health England defining a COVID death as anyone who has ever tested positive and then died for any reason at any time, i.e. the UK being supposedly one of the worst hit countries in the world is a statistical fantasy. PHE officials defined it this way because they didn't want to be accused of being nasty libertarians who were underplaying the problem just to help capitalist workers. The idea that they'd create other bigger problems simply didn't occur to them, or worse, it did, but they didn't care. Let's go to the chat. Okay, start from the beginning here. Good quality today so far. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Bob Jackson says Beirut may have had WMD today. Incredible shockwave, says Chogokin 666. The claims are not false. I work for Vaccine Attorney, says Dan Allison. Okay. Trump just said it was an attack. If so, that changes everything, says Jules Roy. An attack by whom? For what purpose? I don't think people realize how serious concussive injuries are from explosives, says Chogokin 666. Okay. I don't really have any strong opinions on vaccines, actually. But I understand why people are suspicious of them. Because authorities lie to us. They lie to us all the time. And this leads to, it's a very dangerous situation because it leads to apathy, absolute apathy. I wonder whether it would, this sanitary dictatorship would not have been possible without this widespread apathy amongst the public. Don from Beyond says, however, vaccine sensitivities run in families. My mom's sister got ALS and died a slow and horrible death, which took nearly 2 years. Flu vaccine is notorious for causing paralytic conditions. Yes, I was talking about flu vaccine yesterday. I've never even been tempted to have a flu vaccine. I just figured that, influenza is something that the overwhelming majority of people just live with. I mean, it's not very pleasant, that's for certain. Boris Johnson? Okay, I'm not going to repeat that. If you like Gina Colada and Walks in the Rain, yes, I remember that too. Down syndrome is terrible, says De yes. William Hicks says, economically, it's the end of the line. Mass evictions and defaults on the way. How many trillions in the hole are we? What a disaster. Well, apparently the Fed is just saying that it can, print as much money as it wants forever. And isn't that going to unleash inflation, or isn't the value of the American dollar going to collapse? I don't know. They seem confident. I think we really are in a situation which it's unparalleled, because capitalism, as traditionally understood, was abolished by Alan Greenspan circa 2000. Saving was supposed to be good. Saving was supposed to be the bedrock of capitalism. People saved and they loaned their money to banks for interest, and that money was loaned out subsequently to people starting or expanding businesses. But no, apparently saving is bad now, that the government can produce all of the money that we need, which is absolutely crazy. But that is where we are headed. And again, Canada is not the United States. Canada does not have a money printer that goes brrr. It's got to borrow money. And we've already had our credit worthiness downgraded. There's a story at Fox News. Alex Berenson delves into unprecedented COVID lockdowns. 90% of media is saying the same thing. He says, I think the history of lockdowns is really interesting. There are times when you research something and you find yourself saying, wow, I'm excited to learn this, and that's a good feeling as a reporter. I had that in writing this. This is his latest booklet on coronavirus. Unreported Truths About COVID-19 and Lockdowns, Part 2, Update and Examination of Lockdowns as a Strategy. The first part of Berenson's series about coronavirus death counts hit #1 bestseller in Amazon's Kindle store, but the former New York Times reporter said they're supposed to be standalones and you don't need to read the first chapter to get something from the second one. I think it's really important at a time when 90% of the media is saying the same thing with very little pushback or smart questioning to get different perspectives. Even if you disagree with me completely, Berenson said, it's always good to know what other people are thinking. Well, that's what people used to think in the past. He says lockdowns really came out of nowhere. When you look at the history of lockdowns, they were rejected over and over again as a tool when we were considering what to do about flu epidemics, including flu epidemics that would have been much worse than what the coronavirus epidemic is. I'm talking about something up to the Spanish flu, or possibly even worse than that. The health authorities and the scientists who considered this said no lockdowns. Lockdowns don't work. Well, Berenson said previous data suggests that lockdowns don't work once you get to an epidemic stage. The complicated decision to implement them anyway was made in a matter of days as leaders struggled to understand COVID-19. We threw out a lot of work that we had done in a matter of days, Berenson said. It is completely unprecedented. Wherever you stand on lockdowns, you should understand how unprecedented this is. Berenson said the closest comparison is during World War II, when the government essentially took control of society. But even during World War II, yes, the US government took over large industries and quasi-nationalized production of essential commodities and stuff. There weren't efforts to control people's actions. This really is unprecedented. Meanwhile, Berenson would be surprised if there were additional lockdowns going forward, partially because now there is an understanding of how destructive they were to both society and the economy. The idea that there will be national lockdowns or large state lockdowns is hard for me to imagine, he said. In Arizona, Texas, and Florida, the worst of it is behind us in terms of the number of people hospitalized. The death counts will still continue to rise, but they accomplished that without a major lockdown. So I think rationally, governors who look at that and distance themselves from the media hysteria will say, look, in Houston, Phoenix, Miami, without lockdowns, those hospitals continued to function. The author added that rationality has played only a small part in decision-making thus far when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic, so nothing would absolutely shock him at this point. The point of the lockdown is supposed to be to save the hospitals from being overrun, to save us all from some sort of massive societal collapse. That didn't happen. So what on earth would we be doing it for going forward? Well, I suppose there are two possible hypotheses here. One, that this is just gross incompetence and panic on behalf of the authorities, but two, the possibility that it's more sinister than that. That the elites, as we know, have been angered and frightened by the rebellions against globalism around the world. And what do you know? We have a health emergency, and suddenly we have no civil rights left. None. Oh, the government is now going to permit us to leave our apartments. The government is now going to permit us to go to a bar or to order chicken wings. It's incredible stuff. And what's really shocking about it is just how easy it was. It's an emergency. It's a novel coronavirus. We're going to shut down the economy. Oh, by the way, your job and your job and your job, non-essential. You don't have a job anymore. For how long? I don't know. We'll see. And we reserve the right to clamp down again. To clamp down again at any time. I see Dr. Deborah Burke says Americans may have to start wearing masks inside their own homes. I wonder how what the suicide rate in the United States and other countries, particularly in those cities and states which had the harshest lockdowns. What is government telling us now? We have to be panic-stricken for the rest of our lives forever? Are we going to have to wear masks forever? Is school ever going to come back? I mean, real school where pupils, walk or are driven to it. Is that ever coming back? Is it the intention to pay teachers forever for not working? Because I understand that civil servants are not working. The vast majority of them are not working, still getting paid. More on masks. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. The Netherlands has decided not to mandate the wearing of face masks in public, citing the fact that there is no scientific evidence to suggest they're effective against the spread of the coronavirus. From a medical perspective, there is no proven effectiveness of masks. The cabinet has decided that there will be no national obligation for wearing non-medical masks, announced Netherlands Minister for Medical Care, Tamara van Ark. The country's National Institute for Health noted that it is aware of studies from other countries that purport to show masks slow the spread of disease, but will not be heeding them. Indeed, RIVM Chief Jaap van Dissel warned that wearing masks incorrectly, in addition to the effect masks have of eroding the perceived need for social distancing, could increase the risk of transmission because of a false sense of security. So we think that if you're going to use masks in a public setting, then you must give good training for it, he said. Meanwhile, in Sweden, senior epidemiologist Anders Tegnell declared that there is no point in wearing masks in public. We see no point, not even on public transport. Sweden, which has not even instituted a lockdown at any time, appears to be seeing a downward trend in cases. At the beginning of this week, Sweden announced just 398 new cases, down from 767 the week before and 2,530 1 month ago. The curves don't go down, and the curves over the seriously ill begin to be very close to zero. As a whole, it is very positive. I suppose it's very positive if you were against panic and if you were against dictatorship. And, that would explain why Britain and other places are juicing the stats. This is again from Summit News, and it's a story that got a lot of attention. MSNBC producer Ariana Peccary explained that the reason for her deciding to quit her job was that the mainstream media blocks diversity of thought in favor of promoting hysterical voices for ratings, and that a TV veteran admitted to her, "We are a cancer and there is no cure." Peccary, who was an integral member of Lawrence O'Donnell's primetime show, says the media's obsession with Trump is actually costing lives because it is preventing recent discussions about how to fight the coronavirus pandemic. Quote, "This cancer risks human lives even in the middle of a pandemic. The primary focus quickly became what Donald Trump was doing to address the crisis rather than the science itself. As new details have become available about antibodies, a vaccine, or how COVID actually spreads, producers still want to focus on the politics. Important facts or studies get buried." The former producer also revealed that a successful and insightful TV veteran acknowledged to her, "We are the cancer and there's no cure, but if you could find a cure, it would change the world." Peccary also highlighted how the very model by which the corporate press is structured guarantees that voices of dissent are silenced in favor of hysterical political extremists, something that has come to the fore over the last 2 months with the media's relentless promotion of Black Lives Matter narratives. The model blocks diversity of thought and content because the networks have incentive to amplify fringe voices and events at the expense of others, all because it pumps up the ratings. And we have a sobering report that shows hardening attitudes against media. This is from the Associated Press. The distrust many Americans feel toward the news media, caught up like much of the nation's problems in the partisan divide, only seems to be getting worse. This was the conclusion of a sobering study of attitudes towards the press conducted by Knight Foundation and Gallup and released Tuesday. Nearly half of all Americans describe the news media as very biased, the survey found. That's a bad thing for democracy, said Jod Sands, Director of Learning and Impact at the Knight Foundation. Our concern is that when half of Americans have some sort of doubt about the veracity of the news they consume, it's going to be impossible for our democracy to function. Or I suppose there's the possibility that people could just ignore the media. I mean, I don't know. Why are they surprised by this? Look at 2015 and 2016. 4 months, the media insisted that Donald Trump was not running a serious campaign for president, that it was all a publicity stunt, that he was looking to boost his brand, that he was actually terrified of the possibility of becoming a candidate, that he would withdraw from the race because this was a joke that had got out of hand. And then, you know, he wasn't taken seriously as a candidate. He demolished the Republican field in short order. And then we heard how there was no possible way that he could be elected president, that Hillary was going to steamroller him, that this was going to be a debacle like Goldwater in 1964 or Mondale in 1984. They were talking about the Democrats taking Texas, taking other reliably Republican states. They got every single thing wrong. Why? Because they hate Trump and they're terrified of Trump. And we are supposed to take these people seriously? Let's see, the study was conducted before the coronavirus lockdown and nationwide protests over the death of George Floyd. 8% of respondents, the preponderance of them politically conservative, think that the news media that they distrust are trying to ruin the country. The study found that 71% of Republicans have a very or somewhat unfavorable opinion of the news media, while 22% of Democrats feel the same way. And again, you see this tremendous split in America, that kind of split that perhaps augurs some sort of grand conflict, whether virtual or real. The study doesn't attempt to assign blame for these attitudes. President Donald Trump has constantly labeled journalism he doesn't like fake news. Cable news networks Fox News Channel, MSNBC, and CNN feature evening opinion shows that are an increasingly popular pastime for viewers. Well, I remember when CNN started that I was quite excited because, okay, so it's going to be 24 hours of news. And then I discovered it's just the same stories. It's a handful of stories repeated. many, many times, and then the talking heads come on, and they argue typically in a yay, boo fashion. When the BBC started its own rolling news service, I thought, well, okay, this is going to be much better than CNN's, but it's not much different. It's the same handful of stories repeated over and over again. I don't know. Perhaps there's not that much of an audience for news, for actual news, because most of which appears on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, is not actually news. It isn't. It's simply opinion, or worse than that, it's just snark. It's not. They can't stop themselves any longer. Oh, let's see. So, reasons why people don't trust the media, part 79. John Derbyshire writes in VDR, hearty congratulations to Nicholas Sandman of Park Hills, Kentucky. He is the best known and most abused member of the student group from Covington High School who were in Washington, D.C. in January last year for an anti-abortion rally. Sightseeing after their rally, the students, many, including Sandman, wearing MAGA hats, were accosted and taunted by a black supremacist group, then by a Native American activist. They responded with some good-natured chanting of school sports songs. Sandman himself just stood smiling through the whole thing. It was all reported by the press, however, as racist white supremacist teenagers threatening and insulting a harmless old Indian. Yes, and not just the left-wing press either, but a lot of the so-called right-wing or conservative press decided to dance on Nick Sandman's head. Sandman sued 8 media outlets, the Washington Post, CNN, ABC, CBS, The Guardian, The Hill, NBC, and Twitter for defamation, asking for a total $800 million in damages. In January this year, he came to an out-of-court settlement for an undisclosed amount with CNN. Now we've heard that on July the 24th, which as it happened is his 18th birthday, he got another settlement from the Washington Post, amount likewise undisclosed. Addressing the sinister Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, Sandman tweeted that, "We have settled with WAPO and CNN. The fight isn't over. 2 down, 6 to go. Don't hold your breath, Jack." Derbyshire concludes, "I certainly hope the fight isn't over. All strength to you, Nicholas. Radio Derb is cheering you on. Out-of-court settlements in cases like this are way smaller than the amounts being asked for. But I'm betting Nicholas Sandman will come out of this with enough for a very nice car, perhaps a new house for his dad and mom. Jolly good luck to him." Now, you remember when you heard about Bill Clinton and the Lolita Express, Pedo Island, Jeffrey Epstein? Well, the media has decided this is actually a story about, wait for it, Donald Trump. Because apparently there's not a single story in the world that is not actually about Donald Trump. Again, from Steve Watson, the Washington Post attempted to connect elite pedophile Jeffrey Epstein with President Trump following unsealing of court documents, yet completely ignored witness assertions that Bill Clinton was present on the infamous Pedo Island in the Caribbean. The Post published a story last week in which proclaimed before President Trump wished Ghislaine Maxwell well, they had mingled for years in the same gilded circles. Trump was referencing the fact that Epstein ended up dead in prison. I wish her well, that's what he said, not dead in prison. Yet the underlying assertion in this article appears to be that Trump is siding with Maxwell. There is no mention, and has not been in any article from the newspaper, of Epstein's extensive connections to Bill Clinton. However, witness interview. Bill Clinton was at Epstein's Island with Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and, quote, 2 young girls, unquote. The claims in the documents echo those previously made by a former worker on Epstein's Island in a Netflix documentary. The claims run contrary to denials by Clinton that he ever visited the island, which was reportedly the site of multiple sexual assaults of underage women by the convicted pedophile Epstein and his elite guests. The allegations were made by Steve Scully, a 70-year-old phone and internet specialist worker who was present on the island of Little St. James as part of Jeffrey Epstein Filthy Rich, which features testimony from witnesses and victims of Epstein's sordid activities. Again from VDR, there's a story here from Washington Watcher. GOP finally recognizing tech censorship problem, but still far from acting. GOP lawmakers did a better job of grilling the titans of big tech on their anti-conservative censorship alliance with the radical left and far-reaching power to control information at the House hearing last week. And what an amazing coincidence that this happened one day before the quarterly results of these companies were revealed. The questioning would have been a little bit different if they'd held these hearings just a day or two later. Let's see. But despite the improvement over the old tech-worshipping GOP, nothing is actually being done about the problem for two reasons. Democrats are on the other side, and Conservatism, Inc. is fully committed to libertarian no-government intervention dogma, partly because of big tech donations. Only Donald Trump's winning on November 3rd offers any hope of permanent change. The Big Four were Apple's Tim Cook, Amazon's Jeff Bezos, Google's Sundar Pichai, and Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg. Big tech is out to get conservatives, Ohio Representative Jim Jordan began. That's not a hunch, that's not a suspicion, that's a fact. Jordan zinged Google for suppressing conservative sites and videos, bashed Amazon for banning conservative books, and spanked all of the tech giants for cuddling up to China. Florida Representative Greg Steube asked Pichai why Google hid conservative websites and videos. The Indian immigrant Google exec burbled a vague answer. But Florida Representative Matt Gaetz was the star of the show. Why, he asked, does Google provide key technology to the Chinese military when it refuses to aid our own? Gaetz grilled Bezos about hiring the leftist Southern Poverty Law Center to decide which nonprofits that receive money via Amazon's Smile donation program, e.g. VDARE, is banned. I'm just wondering why you would place your confidence in a group that seems to be so out of step and seems to take mainstream Christian doctrine and label it as hate. Bezos bobbed and weaved. The system, he said, is imperfect. Gaetz demanded that Amazon divorce the SPLC. In fact, Gaetz was good on the tech totalitarian issue before this hearing. He recently demanded the prosecution of Zuckerberg for lying to Congress about Facebook's censorship. So Republicans have finally figured out that big tech is a major problem. Indeed, Texas Senator Ted Cruz recently tweeted that the tech giants are the single greatest threats to our democracy and free and fair elections. Oh, yes, more about CNN. And this is from Breitbart and John Nolte. After far-left CNN aired a segment urging Joe Biden to skip the presidential debates, CNN's Brian Stelter falsely claimed this narrative is fueled by right-wing media. Yes, the basement-rated Stelter, a left-wing anti-Trump activist and a proven liar who regularly spreads conspiracy theories, was again shining his gaslight Monday night with another deliberate attempt to deceive the public. Responding to a tweet where Town Hall's Guy Benson asked, "This Biden shouldn't debate boomlet is just a media tempest, right? Right?" Stelter responded with, "It is mostly a right-wing media tempest fueled by hour after hour of Fox commentary not reporting, far removed from campaign reality." Well, it was last month when the New York Times ran a piece by Paul Krugman saying that no, Biden should not debate. He should refuse to debate with Trump unless, one, Trump's tax returns are released, and two, there is a media-chosen fact checker ready to swoop in at any time to say that, I don't know, that Trump made 994 false statements during the debate. And it was just a couple of days ago when former Bill Clinton press secretary Joe Lockhart appeared on CNN to urge Biden to skip the debates. Oh, and Lockhart's CNN appearance happened just days after Lockhart published a piece urging Biden to skip the debates at, you guessed it, CNN. Whatever you do, don't debate Trump. Trump has now made more than 20,000 misleading or false statements, according to the Washington Post. It's a fool's errand to enter the ring with someone who can't follow the rules or the truth. Biden will undoubtedly take heat from Republicans and the media for skipping the debates, but it's worth the risk, as trying to debate someone incapable of telling the truth is an impossible contest to win. But wait, there's more. Over the same weekend, the far-left New York Times published an op-ed urging the cancellation of this year's presidential debates. On top of that, whatever is left of the far-left Newsweek also published a piece about the boomlet of support for the idea of Biden skipping the debates. A number of Democrats, including Bill Kristol, are urging that the debates be canceled. Not Paul Krugman, Thomas Friedman. Sorry about that, who came up with these two conditions. But what does the media do? It lies to you all the time. It's projection. It's constant projection. We're going to accuse you of doing what we're doing, and we'll pretend to be outraged by this. We'll pretend to be outraged by this. That, oh no, debate with Donald Trump. Well, you know, these same people were those who said that Hillary Clinton wiped the floor with Trump in the 2016 debates. And I'm sure they would say the same thing about Joe Biden, because that's what they say. Let's take a look at the chat here. Okay. KMG's non-obedience to the scientific consensus is deeply problematic. It says, helper, scientific consensus on what? On what exactly? Again, no consensus on masks. It's simply, you know, it is a lie to claim that there's a consensus in masks. I mean, these people in charge of the health departments in Netherlands and Sweden, are they idiots? Are they non-scientists? Sandman needs to sue democracy now and shut them down, says Metal Mike. Let's see. MSM is a bigger threat to democracy than SOCMED, says Donald Robertson. I think it was, yes, it was Friedman. Sorry about that. I've made the correction. De Boreas says the Soviets are calling themselves liberals now. Well, they would be the last, wouldn't they? De Boreas says our regulated crony capitalism is not capitalism. Socialists have a special talent in impersonating other doctrines. Well, no, it's not capitalism, but it's still called capitalism. And the same people on the right, of conservatives think, you know, free market, they continue talking as if nothing has happened. Oh, let's say since you know, Clinton and Phil Gramm deregulated the bank so they could just run wild and almost destroy the world in 2007, 2008. They pretend that, you know, companies like Goldman Sachs being made whole after deliberately cheating their best companies or their best customers. They don't seem to have a problem with that. I know Australian slang. For that word. Okay. I used to get the flu vaccine regularly and always had flu symptoms for 7 days afterwards. I stopped taking it and I hadn't had the flu since, says Metal Mike. Well, no, I mean, there are reactions to every vaccine, and this is going to be the biggest rollout of any vaccine ever. There are going to be a lot of negative reactions to this. Walrus Libertarian says they don't want it to end. It's too useful. Well, yeah. I mean, I guess people have rather gotten used to this UBI, haven't they? That we're going to pay you not very much money for not working. But, you know, as I keep warning, there's going to be a social credit component added to that. Debray says, I stopped watching ABC and TV altogether when Karens began talking politics instead of guys talking sports. Yeah. Oprah hosts white guilt session. Whiteness gives you an advantage no matter what. This is from Robert Kraychick at Breitbart. Billionaire media mogul Oprah Winfrey declared in an episode of her eponymous series, The Oprah Conversation. This woman put out a magazine called O, and she put her face on the cover every month for years. I mean, that's an impressive level of vanity. There's a caste system in America. In an episode entitled Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, Part 1, featuring former NFL linebacker Emmanuel Acho, and drawing its name from Acho's YouTube series of the same name, Oprah Winfrey invited several white people to discuss racism, white privilege, and whiteness. Oprah praised her white guests for accusing themselves of being racist. What is wrong with these people? Get up off your knees. Oprah said there are white people who are not as powerful as the system of white people, the caste system that's been put in place, but they still, no matter where they are in the rung or the ladder of success, they still have their whiteness. Whites have a leg up. You still have your whiteness. That's what the term white privilege is. It means that whiteness still gives you an advantage no matter. It is the fundamental issue, declared Oprah, of racial assumptions. I thought Oprah was supposed to be a unifying figure. Now, did this just happen overnight? Why is she talking like this now when she wasn't talking like this 6 months or a year ago, or 2 years, or 5 years ago? Oh, everything has changed. Everything has changed because someone named George Floyd died in Minneapolis. As Ron has pointed out, when you hear this whiteness, white privilege, white supremacy, you could just substitute the words magic or voodoo, because that's essentially what they're saying, that there's just this powerful white force in the world, and it's malign, and it can't really be described. At all. Why is it that Asian people in the United States are earning more money than white people? Are they part of white privilege too? Well, I'm going to talk about model minorities a little later. But it's a bit much for Oprah to bite the people who have fed her. Is it not? Now, this is worrisome. Susan Rice says we must be reimagining the role of the police to end ongoing equality and oppression. From Pam Key at Breitbart. She said this on CBS this morning. When asked if she supported defunding the police, Rice said, "That's not terminology that I would use, but what I would say is this. We have a long history of inequality, of oppression that endures in this country, and we need the police to be part of the solution. In some instances, they are. In other communities, they are not. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, so I'm for reimagining the role of the police, getting them out of things like social work." I presume what she means by this, and I've heard others make this suggestion, that the police get a lot of calls from, someone, typically a relative, is screaming hysterically, threatening harm to herself or himself or to someone else in the house or apartment, or the person is holding a gun or holding a knife or whatever, and so the police appear on the scene. Now, are we supposed to send social workers, unarmed social workers, to do that job? Do you want to deal with a screaming crazy person holding a knife when you are unarmed yourself? I would say that they have not thought this through, but that would imply that, these sort of things are actually thought out by these people. Oh, no, defund the police, reimagine the police. Oh, I see, we're all saying that now. Just like we're all talking about Juneteenth, and we're talking about Emancipation Day. More on that later. And oh, yes, white privilege. Yes. It just seems to come from the sky. No, it's not. It's planned. It's planned, and it's deliberate. And possibility of Susan Rice becoming vice president and then likely president of the United States is a terrifying one. I'm looking at the cover of today's New York Post. After COVID spread like wildfire in nursing homes, killing 6,400, poll asks, who lit the match? And there's a picture of the Love Gov, Andrew Cuomo, the Love Gov, dishing it 24/7. And he thinks he's done an outstanding job as opposed to Donald Trump. I don't know. Donald Trump isn't responsible for the death of 6,400 people like Andrew Cuomo. Let's see, this is from the New York Post. Pence slams Cuomo for poor decisions that caused COVID-19 outbreak deaths. Yes, he ripped Governor Andrew Cuomo's response to the coronavirus pandemic on Monday, claiming his poor decisions were a factor in the Empire State's enormous outbreak and 32,000 fatalities. Our hearts grieve for the fact that 1 in 5 of all the American lives that have been lost in the coronavirus pandemic were lost in the state of New York, and some of that was because of poor decisions by the state and by Governor Cuomo, Pence told Fox News' Laura Ingraham. Lviv's critique followed Cuomo's suggestion earlier on Monday on MSNBC that the country needed a reset at the top, suggesting the Trump administration should be replaced in November. We see the health experts, John Hopkins and others, saying the nation has to hit a reset. What does that mean? Were they going to start over with COVID-19? Is that what they're going to do? We have confusion, we have chaos, we don't have operations set up, and I think it has to start with the President of the United States. Pence pointed out that Cuomo had previously been full of praise for Trump's response to the pandemic, at one point even calling it phenomenal. I liked it better when he said that President Trump's leadership in the pandemic was, in his words, phenomenal, noting that the military hospital ship that was sent to the Big Apple by the feds to help treat the infected. Well, it turns out that they didn't need the hospital ship. And the hospital wards in New York State were not overwhelmed, and they did not run out of ventilators. That everything about Andrew Cuomo's treatment of COVID-19 suggests sweaty panic. But he likes to talk himself up. And of course, he's got his own brother on CNN to talk him up, which is it's unusual, wouldn't you say? Wouldn't you rather expect Chris Cuomo to recuse himself from this, particularly after he claims that he got COVID-19 himself and claims that he isolated himself in his residence for weeks? This is a story which is depressing. It's from the Globe and Mail today. 7 in 10 Canadians signal support for new lockdown measures if COVID-19 resurges. A new poll conducted for the Globe and Mail by Nanos Research. Over 7 in 10 respondents indicated some level of support for closing all but essential businesses and asking exposed Canadians to self-isolate. Even with the economic uncertainty, Canadians are quite receptive to a shutdown of the economy again if there was a resurgence, pollster Nick Nano said. It's pretty clear that Canadians understand that even though we may be doing okay, this is not over. The survey found 50% of respondents said they would support shutting down all but essential businesses, while another 23% said they would somewhat support this. Many Canadians have been insulated from the full economic effect of the pandemic because of taxpayer-funded support. Millions of Canadians have drawn on the Canada Emergency Response Benefit since April. So this is yet another example of what Herman and Chomsky called manufactured consent, that we have a media inspiring us all to panic. We're all gonna die. And then they keep that up. They keep that up even though the numbers in Canada are, they've not been faked as far as I can tell, and they are quite low. And it is only because of nursing home failures in Ontario and Quebec that the numbers are as high as they are. I just, again, in Vancouver Island, I believe there's fewer than 150 cases total from the beginning, and I believe 3 deaths. I wonder what polling from Vancouver Island would show about shutting everything down again, because it was pointless doing it in the first place. Here's more news about New York. 16 shootings leave 20 injured during 24 hours in de Blasio's New York City, reports the New York Post. The Post quoted John Jay College of Criminal Justice adjunct professor Joseph Giacalone responding to the shooting milestone, saying, "It only gets worse from here. As the shootings continue, so will retaliation. It's a vicious cycle that the NYPD worked hard to mitigate, but that they are no longer able, and in some cases willing, to do." Violence is also surging in Democrat Mayor Lori Lightfoot's Chicago. On August 3rd, 2020, Breitbart reported that 34 people were shot, 9 fatally over the weekend. 59 were shot, 3 fatally the weekend prior, and at least 65 were shot, 10 fatally the weekend before that. On August 1st, Breitbart reported Lightfoot, Chicago witnessed a 139% increase in murders in July 2020 compared to July 2019. But is there relief on the way? According to Fox News, a portion of New York City's Upper East Side, which reportedly boasts residents such as billionaire Glenn Dubin and hedge funder John Paulson, has been riddled with a recent uptick in crime, including a weekend gunpoint robbery spree, police said. The New York Police Department's 19th precinct oversees the Upper East Side between East 59th and East 96th Street, described as one of the most densely populated residential areas in Manhattan. Over roughly the past month, the precinct has seen robberies skyrocket 286% compared with the same period last year, with 27 reported incidents. 5 of them are gunpoint robberies. Yeah, that when the rich people begin to be threatened by crime, that's typically when something gets done. Although it may be too late for them now, for the rich of New York City, because it's all Black Matters all the time. And so you've got to stop arresting people, because if you keep arresting people for committing crimes, then you're going to see racial disparities in the numbers, which we have learned this year are completely unacceptable. They're just, they're the result of white supremacy, white privilege, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we have to have a conversation about that. Of course, it's never a conversation. What it is we are lectured, expected to speak in public about how horrible we are and how we have benefited from this magical white supremacy. Let's see, we have reached August, so the September, October, November, we are 3 months away from the election. And we've had a lot of recent activity from President Donald Trump suggesting that he is pushing populism hard in not quite the home stretch of the election campaign. And I'm going to read a bunch of stories. This one from Fox News. Trump says he plans to ban TikTok from U.S. The company has denied it gives data from the app to the Chinese government. Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? A ban would further pressure TikTok's Chinese parent company, ByteDance, to sell the app's U.S. operations amid national security concerns about users' personal data. Microsoft is a leading contender to buy. As far as TikTok is concerned, we're banning them from the U.S., Trump told reporters on Air Force One. I have that authority. Yeah, I don't know why Microsoft would have to buy this. So they really need more concentration in the tech sector. And again, from John Derbyshire, who notes that Donald Trump has come to the rescue of suburbanites. He tweeted on July the 29th, I am happy to inform all of the people living their suburban lifestyle dream that you will no longer be bothered or financially hurt by having low-income housing built in your neighborhood. Yeah, let's see. Washington has no business dictating what is best to meet your local community's unique needs, Ben Carson said. That started off what news outlets call a firestorm of indignation from social justice outfits like the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, which recently libeled VDARE to scare our domain registrar into dropping us. It sputtered that dropping the affordable family housing rule was a full frontal assault on the rule of law. Let's see. The Clinton initiative, the year was 1999, was not in fact explicitly anti-suburb, just a play for more federal control over zoning and transportation. I don't think it was anti-white either. The really open, aggressive anti-whiteness we're all used to now wasn't much in evidence in the 90s before the Great Awakening. It took another 15 years of leftward drift before Obama came right out into the open with AFFH. Essentially, your suburbs, they're too white. So the federal government is going to punish you. Derbyshire says Probably there was also racial revenge in play. How dare white Americans monopolize these pleasant, leafy suburbs, leaving blacks stuck in smelly, crowded, crime-addled inner cities. And this was a dog whistle, apparently, and Derbyshire says, I bet it was, but so what? We suburbanites have votes, too. That is, it's not remarked enough that you hear about like a gender gap. Such and such a candidate is running behind amongst female voters. Well, guess what? The votes of men count just as much as the votes of women. Typically, if you have a candidate with a gender gap where he's not doing so well with female voters, he's typically doing much better with male voters. And in fact, the female vote is not monolithic. There's an enormous difference in voting behavior between married women and those women who are single or divorced. But yeah, oh, you know, running behind with the Hispanic vote, running behind with the black vote, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, okay, all votes are equal. Tom Nichols and the like, Major Toms, they seem to be very upset that poor people actually get to vote in American elections. Well, their vote counts just as much as rich people. Business Insider tweeted out a little video on July 29th. Well, 40 million Americans filed for unemployment during the coronavirus pandemic. Billionaires saw their net worth increase by $500 billion. This was retweeted by President Trump, saying that he was very concerned about the disparities in income in the United States and that it was time to do something about it. And oh, here is another example of populism from Donald Trump, and this is from today. Big Pharma is taking ads against me because I am massively lowering your drug prices, which is obviously not good for them. Medicare premiums will also be going down. I am the first president to take them on. Don't fall for their false ads. Biden plan is for very big increases. No, I don't think Big Pharma is very popular, except amongst its shareholders. And again, from the Trump White House, this is from yesterday. President Donald Trump, we are finalizing H-1B regulations so that no American worker is replaced ever again. Yes, replacing American workers with foreigners is very popular with Chamber of Commerce types, with libertarians, with Conservatism Inc., but that's a tiny group of people. The overwhelming majority of Americans do not like being replaced by foreigners. I look forward to the specifics there. This is from yesterday as well, from the Associated Press. President Donald Trump said Monday that he had fired the chair of the Tennessee Valley Authority, criticizing the federal-owned corporation for hiring foreign workers. Trump told reporters that he was formally removing Chair Skip Thompson and another member of the board, and he threatened to remove other board members if they continued to hire foreign labor. The TVA is a federally owned corporation created in 1933 to provide flood control, electricity generation, fertilizer manufacturing, and economic development to the Tennessee Valley, a region that was hard hit by the Great Depression. The region covers most of Tennessee and parts of Alabama, Mississippi, and Kentucky, as well as small sections of Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia. He also said the TVA board must immediately hire a new chief executive officer who puts the interests of Americans first. According to Trump, the CEO, Jeff Lash, earns $8 million a year. The new CEO must be paid no more than $500,000 a year. Trump said, we want the TVA to take action on this immediately. Let this serve as a warning to any federally appointed board. If you betray American workers, you will hear two words: you're fired. Trump said the authority was replacing many of its in-house technology workers with contractors who rely heavily on foreign workers under the H-1B visa program for highly skilled workers. This is great news indeed. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. America first, Americans first. But it's become controversial because apparently it's a some sort of law of nature that countries must allow themselves to be invaded by foreigners willing to work for little money under terrible conditions. Apparently, there's nothing that can be done about this. Of course, there is, and Trump is doing it. And let's see, again from Breitbart, Trump on Monday challenged the state of Nevada for moving to enact mail-in voting, threatening a lawsuit. In an illegal late-night coup, Nevada's clubhouse governor made it impossible for Republicans to win the state. Post office could never handle the traffic of mail-in votes without preparation, using COVID to steal the state. See you in court. State Democrats held an emergency legislative session on Sunday, passing a bill that would mail every registered voter a mail-in ballot and even allow other individuals to fill out and deliver ballots for the elderly and disabled. As I like to say about mail-in ballots, we bring the fraud to you. And this smacks of a coup. Oh, let's force a vote on this on Sunday evening? Really? We got to guarantee that fraud before it's too late. Let's have another look at the chat. Make Americans first again. Let's see. Trump is a federalist in the truest sense, says Justin Proto. Why is it Maple Leafs and not Maple Leaves? This was explained to me many decades ago, and I'm afraid that I have forgotten. Should people with multiple passports be excluded from those jobs? I don't understand a system which allows people to have citizenship of more than one country. It should be very simple. If you want to be a citizen of one country, then you're going to have to disavow the citizenship of every other country. Otherwise, how do we see loyalty in that? Of course, there's people who collect any number of passports so that presumably they can find a bolt hole. A lot of the explosion in price of real estate in Greater Vancouver and in Victoria has to do with what they call astronauts, the Chinese people who come here and they buy property and they don't live in it. It just sits vacant, but they're constantly bidding up the price. Herb Grubel wrote recently that nothing can be done about the housing crisis in British Columbia without addressing the issue of immigration. Donald Robertson says Canadians will begin lockdown in a couple of months anyway. I don't know. Trudeau rather backed off from threats to nationalize this crisis. Justin Proto says about 30% of police retired in Minneapolis. Crime, including murder, is through the roof, but the elites can afford their own personal details. As for us plebes, hand over your wallets at gunpoint. Again, I'm not so sure about that anymore. I mean, sure, the rich can hire private security, but what happens when they kill some George Floyd or George Floyd equivalent? And BLM is howling for their blood, and local politicians are howling for their blood. Philip Daniel says these people think that equality was somehow a universal of human societies until white people came along, at which point inequality was invented. They literally believe inequality is the anomaly. Well, as I was saying yesterday, let's look at Africa, independent Africa. How does equality look in those countries? It doesn't look very good, does it? And in fact, in South Africa, they're absolutely furious with people coming from Nigeria and other countries. So, apparently, nationalism exists in places outside of the United States of America. Post-industrial capitalism, says Chogokin 666. Well, you've got toll keepers. Google, Microsoft, essentially that's what they are. And it's in their interest for people to stare at screens all day long. They make more money that way. It's also in their interest for people not to leave their homes, for them to order everything over the internet. It's not or to make TikTok videos. Do these things really last 6 seconds? Is that how long they last? Let's see. Maple leaf. I just looked it up. Refers to military badge, circa World War I. Proper nouns take regular plurals. So more than one maple leaf badge would be referred to as the Maple Leafs. Well, there you have it. This is a team that hasn't won the Stanley Cup since 1967. Still, they make money. Well, they made money until this year. It's just a situation like, the Chicago Cubs. The Chicago Cubs were just terrible for, 100 years or so. But so long as people kept going to, Wrigley Field, there was really not much of an incentive to make the team better. And I think it's the same thing with Toronto. Of course, no Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup since 1994. And what is it? Hockey and Tim Hortons, double-double. That is the sum of Canadian culture. Well, the NHL is headquartered in New York City, and Tim Hortons is controlled by a Brazilian hedge fund. And neither of them are Canadian anymore. Oh, yes, George Floyd. He's back in the news again. Steve Saylor writes, here it is August, and Keith Ellison's Minnesota office was still keeping the body cam footage from the cops bottled up. But now the Daily Mail has got their hands on some of it. The amount of fentanyl in George Floyd's system wasn't enough to always kill him, but it was definitely in the range where it sometimes can cause users to stop breathing. A friend who was given fentanyl during an operation said that at one point he just stopped breathing. Fortunately, his anesthesiologist was monitoring closely, so he immediately turned down the dosage and breathing started over again. But when you are taking it yourself, like Floyd was, bad things happen. With our new George Floyd memorial principle that no black man should be arrested if he's really not in the mood to be arrested because, he might resist arrest and wind up dead. Look for massive pushes by white liberals for population transfers of blacks from blue to red areas, all in the name of fighting segregation and punishing hateful whites. I can't see how property values in the blue urban areas can be maintained under this new regimen without clearing out poor blacks in the name of fighting racism. Look for more citations of Raj Chetty's work as proving that blacks must be transferred from, say, Brooklyn to Western Pennsylvania. I don't know, George Floyd, he was always like a curious candidate to be a black saint. I don't know, has the Catholic Church officially made him a saint? They've come pretty close with the blasphemous talk, comparing him to Jesus Christ and comparing his mother to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Yeah. So we have this footage showing a massive freakout from George Floyd, claiming that he can't sit in a car because he's claustrophobic, but he was in a vehicle before that, screaming, "I can't breathe," and this is long before the knee on the neck. Floyd is even heard predicting his own death. "I'll probably just die in this way," he says. Transcripts from the videos were released in mid-July, the Mail reports, but a judge in Minneapolis had ruled the video could only be viewed in the courthouse, meaning few people have had a chance to watch the prepared images. No, you wouldn't want some greater context for this death of George Floyd, would you? To find out that he's out of his mind on Goofenthal, and also his heart is, what, like 80% occluded? The footage includes more than 18 minutes from Officer Alex Kung's body cam and 10 minutes from Officer Thomas Lane. They were the first two cops to arrive on the scene after a complaint that Floyd had attempted to pass a fake $20 bill to buy cigarettes at Cup Foods, a store in the Powderhorn Park section of Minneapolis. I'm just looking at stills from this video, and Floyd, he just appears absolutely deranged. Absolutely deranged. Of course, the autopsy did not show tracheal damage to George Floyd. He's being charged with second and third degree murder. The cops are being charged with second and third degree murder, which means intent. They're not going to be able to prove intent. It's a question of whether these cops are going to get a fair trial. I mean, jury selection is going to be crucial here, obviously. But it's just, we know pretty much the full story now. And this George Floyd, he's not a heroic figure. Never was a heroic figure. He was a career criminal. He's a man who shoved a gun in the stomach of a pregnant woman during a home invasion, demanding money and drugs. But the United States gets burned down for this fellow, and we just hear about him endlessly. There are murals of this fellow. There's a hologram which is going to be terrorizing people. It's going to go on a terror tour of the United States this year. I'll look at you eye to eye. Please don't shoot me, man. Floyd replies, I just lost my mom, man. That's this 46-year-old man. It's a strange thing to say. Is he drunk or something? No, he's got a thing going on, Hill says, pointing to her head and making circular movement with her finger as if to suggest her ex had mental problems about the police. Now, one might have thought that the media would pay an enormous amount of attention to this story, but no, of course it isn't, because it disrupts the narrative. And of course, the Daily Mail is a newspaper which is read by a great many Americans because it routinely covers stories that American media refuses to cover, simply refuses to cover. And what do we have? Our own little Canadian here. Yeah, I'm just going to give you an idea just how incredibly stupid my country has become. This is a story from CTV News yesterday. Canucks, that's the Vancouver Canucks. Media staff issue apology, delete tweet containing mention of George Floyd. So I don't know. It's like a Venn diagram here. And okay, so the Canucks, okay, young, fast, exciting hockey, 10,000 sushi restaurants, film capital of Canada, cloudy with a chance of rain, David Suzuki and Michael Bublé, some call it pretentious. And then Minnesota, 10,000 lakes, Mall of America, snowy with a chance of tornado, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Bob Dylan. And then in the middle, it says justice for George Floyd. This was deemed to be insensitive. A social media staff of the Vancouver Canucks have deleted a message on Twitter and issued an apology after many complained, I'm sure many, about a reference to the death of a Black American man killed during an arrest earlier this year. The original tweet was sent out shortly before the Canucks faced off against the Minnesota Wild on Sunday evening. In the graphic posted by the team's official Twitter account, comparisons were made between the two cities. Yes, justice for George Floyd. It's the last comment that caused backlash and criticism from local organizers of Vancouver's Freedom March. What's the Freedom March? It's to celebrate Emancipation Day, which is the day that no one had heard of until last week. But no, Emancipation Day has always been a huge thing in Canada. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. I am utterly appalled that an organization full of adults finds this appropriate, said Nova Stevens. It's very upsetting that people think this kind of behavior is acceptable. Using a dead man's name to promote yourself is the worst kind of human decency because it shows a lack of empathy. George Floyd's name has been used to justify billions of dollars in damage. So I don't know, it gets used for everything else. Less than an hour after the original post, a staff member with the Canucks tweeted an apology. I'm responsible for that graphic and apologize to everyone I offended, wrote Derek Jory, whose bio says he's the writer and social media for the Canucks. My intent in including justice for George Floyd in the middle column was to continue the Black Lives Matter conversation with a fact we all agree on, but that was not the impact. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Social media expert, and yep, how did this happen? Yeah. How did an insensitive tweet get sent? Well, that so rarely happens that I can understand why they would need an investigation into this and to drag out experts. But that's the price you pay for groveling. That oh, really? So I'm not groveling in the approved way? There's a hilarious piece in the Toronto Star called Confessions of a Model Minority, How I'm Learning to Confront My Own Biases by Joanna Chu. And Joanna Chu is described as a Vancouver-based reporter covering Canada-China relations and current affairs on the West Coast for the Star. So, yeah, I guess the Chinese want to get in on this Black Lives Matter. Childhood for me was busy. My parents, who immigrated to Canada from Hong Kong, rarely took time off work and spent their weekends chauffeuring my brother and me to our lessons. It was all they knew. In Asia's cutthroat cities, many parents feel they have no choice but to spend a huge amount of their salaries to help their offspring stand out from the studious masses. We never went camping or fishing or whatever other Canadian families did for leisure. Our Saturday mornings consisted of 3 hours of Cantonese school. If one of us got a perfect score on our vocabulary test, we would get McDonald's for lunch as a treat. After that, we'd head straight to 2 hours of piano lessons in a neighboring Vancouver suburb. On Sunday mornings, we attended art class, followed by tutoring in music theory, composition, or music history. All those lessons were supposed to stimulate our growing brains. I always felt connected to Hong Kong as my birthplace and embraced its stereotypical work ethic. I cried when my brother brought home a report card that contained mostly B's and a C. I didn't see anything wrong with being a so-called modern minority. Sometimes strangers would say rude or mocking things to us, but racism was something to make peace with. Life would inevitably get better, after all, if we just kept working hard and didn't complain. Besides, I volunteered every week and started clubs at my school devoted to equality and human rights issues. Wow, this woman is the whole package. And she says that was part of the whole package of becoming an exemplary world citizen. No, you're not a citizen of the world. You are presumably a citizen of Canada. I thought it wouldn't be long before there was an ethnic minority prime minister if we all just kept working hard. I was taught to brush off racism as a kind of flattery that has stemmed from people being jealous of Asians' high rate of university admission and higher than average salary level in North America. Last year I was working downtown and people would give me dirty looks or yell slurs at me on the street. Really? Really? Online, I was regularly getting a litany of abuse. My dad tried to comfort me by saying it was because I looked like an executive with my new job. It was a sign of success. This wishful thinking made sense to me, but now I see why it's illogical in the face of hate crimes happening around the world against people of Asian appearance. In Vancouver, a man pushed a 92-year-old man with dementia to the ground outside a convenience store while yelling racist insults about COVID-19. In another incident, someone punched a woman of Asian descent near a bus stop downtown and walked away. Dakota Holmes, an Indigenous woman, was punched in the face and told to go back to Asia while she was walking her dog. A recent Angus Reid Institute poll found that almost 30% of Chinese Canadians surveyed said they had been physically attacked since the COVID-19 crisis began. That is an obvious, outrageous lie. 30% of Chinese Canadians have been physically attacked in the last few months, and presumably they're being attacked outdoors or outside of their homes. Then we all would have seen such an incident. While 43% said they've been threatened or intimidated. More nonsense. It's a shock to the system for some of us, a reminder that racism can't be outworked, out-hustled, or outrun. No, it is magic. It is magic, apparently. It can't be stopped. It can't be reasoned with, and it just won't quit. Rightly so, many of us are speaking up to say that Asian communities shouldn't stop at finally acknowledging that racism against Asians is a serious problem. Around the world, people are also organizing under the Asians for Black Lives banner. When police officer Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd, 3 other officers were present, including Tu Thao. Oh dear. Thao's participation in Floyd's death has rightfully sparked calls for Asian communities to better address the ways in which anti-Blackness is embedded into many Asian cultures and societies. Sometimes this doesn't come in the form of overt acts of hate, but in our resounding silence on systemic issues affecting other minorities that cannot be solved by trying to play within the rules of white supremacy. She's a victim of white supremacy. Yep. Look, strong horse, weak horse. That not that long ago, women like this young woman, she would have felt the need to identify with white people in Canada. But since white people now are wicked and admit that they're wicked and beg to be denounced, then obviously Chu is going to pick the strong horse. Stephen Zhao argued in an op-ed piece in the Star last week that a sense of superiority based on work ethic is prevalent among Chinese Canadians and can lead to prejudice. In recent public discussions in Canada, we mostly heard from Asian millennials referring to racism among our elders and pledging to speak with our elders about their derision of people with darker skin. Although our aunties and uncles are more likely to say racist things out loud, younger people surely have biases too. Oh, one can only hope. What can an Asian Canadian who has internalized the model minority myth do? Can we just stop using this phrase model minority, because they are not model minorities. If they were model minorities, they would not be seeking any excuse to identify as enemies of the majority. What can an Asian Canadian who has internalized the model minority myth do? Personally, I feel like I've dug myself into a hole of work and volunteer commitments. Now we get some moaning. My instinct is to sign up for more work on anti-Blackness and anti-Indigenous topics. As co-chair of a group that promotes the contributions of women and people of color on China studies, I put together a resources list for China expert communities to fight anti-Black racism and have been going through all of the readings. Perhaps part of the solution is to stop the endless activity. Yes, perhaps it is. I'm lucky to have multiple sources of income during the pandemic, but exhaustion skews judgment. Oh, you work so very hard. Instead of writing this essay in a few hours as I normally would, I asked my editor for some time to reflect on my complicity in social injustices. It's been long overdue. My biases are rooted in not only racism, but also classism and ableism, where despite having a disability myself, ADHD, which is a made-up disease, is made up to sell drugs, I've assumed that most people in Canada have similar access to education and can overcome their challenges to pursue conventional success. When we speak of racism, it's easy to think it's a problem that other people have. The uncomfortable truth is that we all have unconscious biases that can grow into hate if we don't confront them within ourselves. So this woman complains about how hard she works. And she wants sympathy for how hard she works, and also because she has a made-up disease. But, oh, yes, I have a problem with racism, too. And what do you want, a medal? Seriously. This is just, how can Canadians deal with the crisis of Black Lives Matter? I guess in a typically Canadian way, by asking to be applauded for being embarrassing, I guess is what it comes down to. Let's talk a little bit more about China and a man called John McCallum. And he was an important person in Canada for many years, and perhaps he still is. Let's see, according to Wikipedia, he was born in 1950. He's a Canadian politician, economist, diplomat, and former university professor. A former Liberal member of Parliament, he was Canadian ambassador to China from 2017 to 2019. And he has served in the governments of Liberal Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, and Justin Trudeau. He's been Secretary of State for International Financial Institutions, Minister of National Defense, Minister of Veterans Affairs, and Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. He is married to a Chinese woman from Malaysia, and he was forced out of the cabinet when he decided that he was going to speak up for the woman who is under house arrest in Vancouver, the Huawei vice president. There's a whole bunch of embarrassing things about this man. McCallum became widely known and criticized in 2002 when he admitted, while serving as Minister of National Defense, that he had never heard of the 1942 Dieppe raid, a fateful and nationally significant operation for Canadian forces during the Second World War. Ironically, he wrote a letter to the editor of the National Post in response, but committed a further gaffe, confusing Canadian participation in the 1917 Battle of Vimy Ridge in France with Vichy France from 1940 to 1944. Response that the continued historical ignorance prompted outrage and humor among the press. In November 2002, while still serving as Defense Minister, McCallum encountered further controversy when officials refused him to allow him on board an Air Canada flight because his breath smelled heavily of alcohol. And so he's in the news again. And this is, look, it's difficult to consider this as anything other than straight up influence peddling, which is supposed to be illegal under Canadian law. This is from Steve Chase and Nathan Vanderclip in the Globe and Mail. Former Canadian Ambassador and Cabinet Minister John McCallum's work for a Chinese immigration company should be investigated by the Federal Ethics Commissioner, opposition MPs, and a watchdog group say. As the Globe and Mail reported earlier this week, McCallum has been working as a speaker for the Weilian Group, a Shanghai-based immigration agency that helps people immigrate to Canada, among other countries. McCallum served in Trudeau's cabinet as immigration minister before he was appointed Canada's ambassador to China in 2017. He was fired in 2019 after repeatedly speaking in support of the release of Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive accused of fraud in the U.S. and arrested in Canada. Last fall, Weilian paid to have McCallum speak to clients in 5 Chinese cities, according to a person familiar with the arrangement. In July, McCallum delivered remarks to another event organized by Weilian, this one online, in which he pitched Canada as a worthwhile destination for people from China and cited his friends in the current cabinet. This is an awkward paragraph there because it suggests that the Chinese don't know what Canada is. Given how many Chinese there are in Canada now, and given how many Chinese come here every year, I don't think that the Chinese need to be hipped on what Canada is and what opportunities that it presents for Chinese people. Duff Conacher, a co-founder of Democracy Watch, says he thinks McCallum should be investigated for a possible breach of Section 33 of the Conflict of Interest Act, where the law says no former public office holder shall act in such a manner as to take improper advantage of his or her previous public office. He said being paid by the Weilian Group to speak to their clients in China who may want to immigrate to Canada and would be dealing with Canadian government institutions through that process is, in my opinion, unsuitable and wrongful because it essentially amounts to McCallum cashing in on his public service as former Canadian government ambassador to China and former immigration minister. Yeah, yes. A conservative immigration critic, Peter Kent, says he's concerned that Mr. McCallum's work with Weilian does not pass the smell test. No, it stinks to high heaven. Kent said there should be a review of the conflict of interest rules for political appointees to ambassadorial posts. Less than 6 months after he left the ambassador's job in 2019, McCallum became a senior strategic advisor for Macmillan LLP, a Canadian law firm. We see this over and over and over again. You see, they're not allowed to be lobbyists Oh no, they're consultants or strategic advisors. Let's see. McCallum has a BA degree from Queen's College, Cambridge University, and a PhD degree in economics from McGill. So he is not a lawyer. But he's working for a law firm, and we see this. We saw this with the former leader of the Canadian Alliance, who was recently canned for comparing being bullied in school to something racial, I think. But no, I mean, I don't see how, again, this is influence peddling. And how this fellow, with his Chinese wife from Malaysia, obviously second wife, he becomes Minister of Immigration, and then he becomes ambassador to China. I mean, what's going on in this country? This is a fellow who should have been kept far, far away from those posts. But I don't know. I'd like to see an investigation, into Chinese influence in this country. There was Operation Sidewinder, which I spoke about a few weeks ago, which was suppressed, and all copies were ordered destroyed because I guess it was a little too disquieting to find out just how influential the Chinese were in Canada 25 years ago. Obviously, they're much more influential now. And this is such a corrupt country. This is really such a corrupt country. And again, speaking about Justin Trudeau and his many scandals, that exposure of scandals does not seem to result in reform. Instead, it simply leads to apathy, the public believing that all politicians are crooks and that there's nothing that can be done about it. So, why make a fuss? In fact, with Justin Trudeau's latest scandal with this We charity, you had smug columnists, even before the depth of the scandal had been revealed, saying, not a big deal, not going to hurt Trudeau, not going to force his resignation. Well, how do you know this? How do you know this? I see that BC records 146 new COVID-19 cases, no new deaths since Friday. Now, again, if people aren't dying of this disease, then why is there still a crisis? Let's see, there remain 319 active cases of COVID-19 across the province, including 8 people who are in hospital for treatment, 4 of whom require critical care. This is a strange use of the word case, because if there are only 8 people who are in the hospital for treatment, this suggests to me that there are 8 active cases of COVID-19 in a province which has 5.1 million people. Let's see, Dr. Bonnie Henry, who has been pushing, oh no, this is not going to end, it's not over, no, it's not over. She said, new cases are still concerning. We need to make sure that these new cases don't lead to a dramatic uptick. Once again, BC's top doctor urged everyone who has been ordered to self-isolate to take a 2-week self-isolation period seriously. She also encouraged all British Columbians to visit with friends in a safe way. Well, if British Columbians are currently visiting with friends in an unsafe way, and it has resulted in a situation where people are not dying of COVID-19 anymore, and there are 8 hospitalizations, that tells me that the point of danger is long past. But Bonnie Henry has become a famous woman in British Columbia and in Canada. Yeah, let's see. There are 6,384 active cases of COVID-19 in Canada, which is really not that very many. We have 102,000 people who have recovered. and 4.24 million people have been tested. And this is obviously the reason for the increase in the number. We see in many provinces, let's see, in Newfoundland, 3 deaths. Newfoundland was locked down. Nonetheless, it is a island nearly in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, but apparently that doesn't make any difference. Just how long can this be kept up? Because again, if people aren't even being hospitalized for it anymore, what possible justification is there for panic? And for again, these absurd lines, which I'm still having to, oh, got to keep 6 feet distance. Oh, I have to wait, 15 minutes to get into the drugstore because there are other people ahead of me. It's absolutely ridiculous. Okay, let's see. People drink on flights, says Donald Robertson. I think aren't the airlines looking for an excuse to stop providing food and alcohol? Visionary Companion says, don't neglect all of those wonderful Black people who have majored in East Asian studies and written wonderful analyses of Confucianism, compelled by a disinterested pursuit of knowledge. You have a very dry wit there, Visionary Companion. I advocate a moratorium on the word systemic, says Chogokin666. Yes. Also epidemiologist. Of course, that's a hard word to say, or at least it's hard for me to say it. And yes, everyone has their own favorite epidemiologist. Maybe we'll have epidemiology baseball cards, where we can we can trade and we can collect, because epidemiologists don't get enough attention. My trail of disgrace, says George Floyd's mother died in 2018. Well, no, it's clear that he was not thinking very clearly when he was, shouting this out. That must be very wearying on policemen to deal with people who are out of their skulls, And Floyd was a big man, but in the CTV report of the shocking Vancouver Canucks tweet, the woman who was reading the report referred to him constantly and exclusively as George Lloyd. And yeah, well, apparently he's not that famous. Apparently some people don't know what his name actually is. No promises under duress, LOL, says Debrayas. Fake riots. I don't know. We've had real riots, haven't we? We've had real riots. We've even had several Black Lives Matters demonstrations in Victoria. I would reckon there's probably fewer than 1,000 Black people in Victoria, although the number of Black people actually during this COVID-19 panic seems to have exploded in Victoria for some reason. Oh, here we go. This is from Dr. Theresa Tam. Physical distancing, mask wearing could be in place for 2 to 3 years, even with vaccine. Canadians shouldn't expect a COVID-19 vaccine to be a silver bullet that will bring a swift end to the coronavirus pandemic and a return to normal, according to the country's chief public health officer. Dr. Theresa Tam used her briefing on Tuesday in Ottawa to temper expectations about the speed and effectiveness of a vaccine. She reiterated the importance of physical distancing, proper hand hygiene, and mask wearing, and attempted to dissuade any notion that a vaccine can make life go back to the way it was in a couple of months. We're going to have to manage this pandemic certainly over the next year, but certainly we are planning for the longer term of the next 2 to 3 years, during which the vaccine may play a role, but we don't know yet. Tam said it's unclear at this stage how effective a vaccine will be. Well, wouldn't you want to make sure that it was very effective before you rolled it out? She said key questions remain about the degree and duration of immunity a vaccine will provide, the dosage that will be needed, and whether it will prevent people from getting infected altogether or simply prevent severe illness requiring hospitalization, and how many guinea pigs are going to be employed testing that out. There are more than 166 vaccines at various stages of preclinical and clinical human testing across the globe right now. The World Health Organization says US and European experts say under an optimistic scenario, the first of those vaccines could complete testing and get approval for distribution next year. Oh, it's likely there won't be enough vaccines for the population, said Tam, so there'll be prioritization, and we're looking at that. She said she agreed with Dr. Anthony Fauci, the top infectious disease specialist in the US, who told Congress last week that he was cautiously optimistic that a safe and effective vaccine will be available by the end of the year. Despite that, she said public health officials are planning for a scenario in which measures that have been put in place thus far, including physical distancing to limiting crowd sizes, could be required for at least the next several years. Just the assumption here is that the Canadian people are so battered, so weak, so terrified that there's no possibility of rebellion against this. That public health bureaucrats can just say, yeah, you have to treat everyone as if they are a dire threat to your life, despite the fact that effectively no one is dying of this disease anymore. And how long is it going to last? Well, the curve by then, it's, well, you don't miss your water till your well runs dry, I suppose. And once again, it is absolutely shocking to me how easy it was for our leaders to strip us of our most basic civil rights. I'm going to take one final look at the chat. Brent Studemeyer says, if it's not very effective, why force everyone to get vaccinated? Yes, that is the question. But as we've already seen, there is going to be an enormous resistance to the vaccination. My trail of disgrace says they are out of their skulls or lying or both half the time. Would definitely be wearying. Well, that's the show for today. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you enjoyed the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done already. On Thursday, I am going to be discussing John Borman's 1974 dystopia film, Zardos. And on Friday on the book club, I am going to be discussing Russell Miller's outstanding biography of L. Ron Hubbard called Bareface Messiah. If you'd like to make a donation to this program, which would be much appreciated, especially at this time, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Canadians can send money directly to me through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I will leave you with this. In these times of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that all you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.